The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the general store, and Lillian Morrison stepped down into the dust of Snake River, Idaho, carrying everything she owned in 2 worn carpet bags and clutching a teaching contract that promised shelter as part of her compensation. It was the last week of September in 1882, and the mountain air already held the sharp bite of approaching winter. She smoothed her dove-gray traveling dress and looked around at the rough collection of buildings that would be her new home, searching for the schoolhouse where she was supposed to meet the town council about her lodging arrangements. What she found instead was a hastily scrawled note tacked to the schoolhouse door, informing her that the boarding arrangement had fallen through. The widow who had agreed to house her, having unexpectedly remarried and moved to Boise City 3 days prior. Lillian stood there reading the note twice, then 3 times, as though the words might rearrange themselves into something more favorable. 23 years old, alone in a town where she knew no one, with $17 to her name and winter coming fast to the high country. She had left Philadelphia after her father's death, seeking a fresh start away from the sympathetic looks and the marriage proposals from men who saw her as a problem to be solved rather than a person to be known. Teaching had seemed like a noble purpose, a way to be useful and independent. Now that independence felt terrifyingly fragile. "You the new schoolteacher?" a voice asked from behind her. Lillian turned to find a man standing in the afternoon shadow of the schoolhouse, tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that fell past his collar beneath a battered hat. He wore work-worn denims and a faded blue shirt, and his hands rested on his belt in a posture that suggested he had learned to stand in a way that made him look less threatening than his size might otherwise imply. His eyes were a startling shade of green, like the pines that climb the mountains surrounding the valley. "I am," she said, straightening her shoulders, "Lillian Morrison." "Isaac Ramsey," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "I work the cattle ranch north of town. Word travels fast in a place this size. Heard about your situation from the postmaster about 20 minutes ago." "I see bad news has wings," Lillian said, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. "I suppose the whole town knows I have nowhere to stay." Isaac shifted his weight, studying her with an expression that seemed equal parts concern and calculation. "There is not much that stays private here. Look, Miss Morrison, I do not mean to be forward, but I have some land about 2 miles upriver. Good land with timber and a spring. Been meaning to build a cabin on it before winter sets in. If you are willing to wait a few weeks, I could put something together that would be yours. Proper and legal, no strings attached. The town needs a teacher, and you need a roof." Lillian stared at him, uncertain whether to be grateful or suspicious. In her experience, men rarely did anything without expecting something in return. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" "Because I remember what it is like to need help and not have anywhere to turn," Isaac said simply. "And because my sister was a teacher back in Missouri before she died. She would have wanted someone to help you." Something flickered across his face when he mentioned his sister, a grief that had worn smooth at the edges but never fully disappeared. The honesty in his voice reached something in Lillian that all her Philadelphia Polish had not quite buried. "Where would I stay in the meantime?" "Martha Henderson runs the boarding house. She is full up permanent, but she has a storage room. She might let you use temporary if I ask nice and pay for it. It is not much, but it is clean and warm." Lillian looked at the note again, then at the mountains rising blue and massive in the distance, their peaks already dusted with early snow. She thought about the $17 in her handbag and the fact that the next stagecoach east would not run for another week. She thought about her father telling her she was too stubborn for her own good, and her own voice responding that stubbornness was just determination that someone disapproved of. "All right," she said, "but I insist on paying you back somehow. I will not be in debt." Isaac smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something warmer. "You can teach the ranch hands to read if you are set on making it even. Most of them never had the chance to learn, and they are too proud to ask." They shook hands on it, her small palm disappearing into his calloused grip, and Lillian felt the first small seed of hope take root in the uncertainty. She did not know it then, but that handshake would change both their lives in ways neither could imagine. Martha Henderson turned out to be a practical woman in her 50s, with iron-gray hair and shrewd eyes that missed nothing. She looked Lillian up and down, then looked at Isaac with an expression that suggested she saw far more than either of them realized. "The storage room has a cot and a washstand," Martha said. No window, but there is a lamp. $2 a week, and that includes breakfast and supper. You will have to make your own arrangements for midday. I can bring her lunch from the ranch, Isaac said. We always cook extra. Martha raised an eyebrow. Mighty generous of you, Isaac Ramsey. Just being neighborly, Isaac replied evenly. But Lillian noticed the faint color that rose in his neck. The storage room was exactly as advertised, small, windowless, and clean, with a narrow cot covered in a patchwork quilt and a washstand with a chipped basin. Lillian set down her carpetbags and sat on the cot, feeling the full weight of her situation settle over her. She had been so brave in Philadelphia, so certain that she could make her own way. Now, here she was, dependent on the charity of strangers in a town that felt like the edge of the world. A knock on the door interrupted her spiral of doubt. "Miss Morrison?" Martha's voice called. "There is hot water in the kitchen if you want to wash up before supper, and Isaac left this for you." Lillian opened the door to find Martha holding a bundle wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a thick wool shawl in deep blue, well-made and clearly expensive. A note in rough handwriting read, "Gets cold at night in the mountains. Welcome to Snake River." "That man has a good heart," Martha said quietly. "Lost his whole family to fever 5 years back. Parents, sister, brother-in-law, and 2 little nephews. He has been alone on that ranch ever since, working himself near to death. First time I have seen him take an interest in anything besides cattle and solitude." Lillian folded the shawl carefully, running her fingers over the soft wool. He mentioned his sister, Caroline. She was a sweet girl, loved teaching at the mission school. Isaac adored her. When the fever took them all within a week, something broke in him. He sold the family farm in Missouri and came out here to start over. Been here 3 years now. That night, Lillian lay awake on the narrow cot, wrapped in the blue shawl and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the boarding house settling around her. She thought about Isaac Ramsey and the grief he carried, about building a cabin for a stranger because his sister had been a teacher. She thought about her own grief for her father and the way loss could either close you down or crack you open to other people's pain. School started the next morning, and Lillian discovered she had 18 students ranging from 6 to 15 years old, all crammed into a one-room schoolhouse with a potbelly stove and mismatched desks. They studied her with open curiosity. These children of ranchers and merchants and one grizzled prospector who had struck silver and promptly married a mail-order bride young enough to still need schooling. "I am Miss Morrison," Lillian said, standing before them in her best teaching dress with her hair pinned severely back. "I come from Philadelphia, where I attended normal school and taught for 2 years. I know this is different from what you are used to, but I promise to be fair and to help each of you learn as much as you are willing to work for." A boy of about 12, with red hair and freckles, raised his hand. "Is it true you do not have anywhere to live?" "Tommy Henderson, you mind your manners?" a girl who looked like his older sister hissed. "It is all right," Lillian said. "Yes, there was a misunderstanding about my lodging, but Mr. Ramsey has kindly offered to build me a cabin, so I will have a proper home soon enough." "Isaac Ramsey?" a different girl asked, her eyes wide. "He barely talks to anyone." "Well, he talked to me," Lillian said firmly. "Now, let us begin with geography. How many of you can point out Idaho on a map?" The day passed in a blur of lessons and assessments as Lillian tried to gauge what each student knew and what they needed to learn. The children were mostly well-behaved, hungry for knowledge in the way of those who understood its value because it was scarce. By the time she dismissed them at 3 in the afternoon, Lillian's head ached and her feet hurt, but she felt the deep satisfaction of work that mattered. She was erasing the chalkboard when she heard boots on the schoolhouse steps. Isaac appeared in the doorway, his hat in his hands and his dark hair damp as though he had just dunked his head in the horse trough to clean up. "Thought you might be hungry," he said, holding out a cloth-wrapped bundle. "Roast beef and bread. The cook makes extra on Mondays." Lillian's stomach growled audibly and she laughed despite herself. "I did not realize I had forgotten to eat. Thank you." They sat on the schoolhouse steps together, and Lillian unwrapped the food to find thick slices of beef on fresh bread, with a wedge of yellow cheese and 2 apples. It was simple fare, but after a long day it tasted like a feast. "How was your first day?" Isaac asked. "Challenging, rewarding, terrifying." Lillian took a bite of bread and chewed thoughtfully. "Your students are bright. They just need someone to push them a little." "They are not my students." "You live here?" You care about this town. That makes them yours too. She glanced at him sideways. Martha told me about your sister. I am sorry. Isaac was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the mountains. Caroline would have liked you. She always said teaching was the most important work there was because you were shaping the future. I did not understand what she meant until she was gone and I saw how much the town missed her. Is that why you are helping me? Because I remind you of her? No, Isaac said, meeting her eyes. You are nothing like Caroline. She was soft-spoken and gentle. You are more like a storm trying to behave itself. Lillian did not know whether to be offended or amused. I am not sure that is a compliment. It is, Isaac said. This country needs storms. Gentle does not always survive out here. Something in his words resonated with Lillian, the acknowledgement that she was not what a lady was supposed to be, and that maybe here, in this raw place, that could be a strength instead of a failing. They finished the meal in comfortable silence, and when Isaac stood to leave, he paused. I will start on the cabin tomorrow. The land is about 2 miles upriver, like I said. If you want to see it and have a say in how things are laid out, I could take you Saturday morning. I would like that, Lillian said. Saturday dawned cold and clear, with frost silvering the grass and the smell of wood smoke hanging in the air. Isaac arrived at the boarding house with a sturdy mare saddled and ready, and Lillian came out wearing her traveling dress and the blue shawl, her hair braided in a long plait down her back. Have you ridden much? Isaac asked. Not since I was a girl, but I remember the basics. He helped her mount, his hand steadying her waist, and Lillian tried to ignore the flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with nervousness about riding. Isaac swung up onto his own horse, a tall bay gelding with intelligent eyes, and they set off north along the river road. The Snake River ran swift and cold beside them, its water the deep green blue of glacial melt. Cottonwoods lined the banks, their leaves gone golden with autumn, and beyond them the sage-covered hills rolled up toward the mountains. It was beautiful in a way that Philadelphia had never been. All that space and sky and the sense that the world was still being made. It is so empty, Lillian said. Is that bad or good? I am not sure yet. It feels like you could disappear out here and no one would ever find you. That is why some people come, Isaac said, and why some people leave. You have to be able to live with yourself out here because there is not enough distraction to avoid it. They rode in silence for a while, following a track that wound along the river. Lillian watched Isaac from the corner of her eye, noting the easy way he sat his horse and the constant alertness in how he scanned their surroundings. He carried a rifle in a saddle scabbard, and she wondered what dangers he was watching for. Wild animals? She asked, nodding toward the gun. Sometimes, mostly it is just habit. Better to have it and not need it. He pointed ahead to where the trail curved around a stand of pines. There, that is the land. They rode into a clearing that took Lillian's breath away. It was a natural meadow of maybe 3 acres, sheltered by pine forest on 3 sides and open to the south for sunlight. A spring bubbled up from the rocks on the western edge, forming a small pool before trickling down to join the river. The grass was tall and golden, and the view looked out across the valley to the mountains beyond. Isaac, this is beautiful, Lillian breathed. You should build here for yourself. I have a house at the ranch, not much to look at, but it is solid. He dismounted and helped her down, and they walked into the clearing together. I thought the cabin could go there, on that rise. The spring would be close for water, and the trees would block the north wind in winter. There is enough timber here to build without having to haul lumber from town, which will save time. Lillian turned slowly, taking it all in. It feels like a secret place, like it has been waiting for someone to find it. That is what I thought when I first saw it 2 years ago. Bought it from the land office for almost nothing because it is too far from the ranch to be useful for grazing. But I could never shake the feeling it was meant for something. They spent an hour walking the property, Isaac pointing out where he would cut trees and how he would orient the cabin to catch the morning sun. He explained his plans with an engineer's precision, describing the size of the windows and the pitch of the roof, the stone fireplace he would build, and the covered porch on the south side. It will not be fancy, he warned, but it will be tight and warm, and it will last. It sounds perfect, Lillian said. When will you start? Monday. I have 3 ranch hands who owe me favors, and they have agreed to help. We will work mornings and evenings, leave the middle of the day for ranch work. If the weather holds, we can have it finished in 3 weeks, maybe 4. That is barely enough time before the heavy snows come. I know, Isaac said. That is why we need to start now. They rode back to town as the sun climbed higher, warming the air enough that Lillian could loosen the shawl around her shoulders. She felt lighter somehow, as though seeing the land had made the impossible suddenly real. She would have a home here, in this wild, beautiful place, and she would make a life that was entirely her own. "Thank you," she said as they reached the boarding house, "for everything you were doing." "Thank you for giving me a reason to do it," Isaac replied. And there was something in his eyes that made Lillian's heart skip. The next 3 weeks became a rhythm of work and anticipation. Lillian taught her students during the day, often with sawdust in Isaac's hair when he came by at lunch with food from the ranch. He would stay for 20 minutes, telling her about the progress on the cabin, showing her sketches he had made of the layout. His hands were always scraped and blistered from the work, and Lillian found herself wanting to tend them, to smooth salve over the rough skin. "You are working too hard," she said one afternoon, catching his hand as he handed her an apple. Isaac looked startled by her touch, but did not pull away. "It is a race against the weather. We had snow flurries yesterday up on the mountain. What about your ranch work? Who is doing that while you build?" "I hired on an extra man temporarily. It is worth the cost." He met her eyes. "You are worth the cost." Lillian felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I am paying you back, remember? Reading lessons for the ranch hands." "About that," Isaac said. "Would you mind if I sat in on those lessons? There are things I would like to learn too." "You cannot read?" Lillian asked, surprised. "I can read some, enough to get by. But Caroline tried to teach me better before she died, and I never found the time to finish learning. Figured now might be a good time to try again." "Of course you can join," Lillian said softly. "I would be honored to teach you." So 2 evenings a week, Lillian walked out to the ranch with Isaac after school, and they sat around the bunkhouse table with 4 cowhands who ranged from barely 20 to near 60. The older man, a grizzled cowboy named Pete with a drooping mustache, admitted he had never learned his letters at all. "My folks were dirt poor," he said without shame. 10 kids and not enough food. Soon as I was big enough, I was working. Never had time for school." Lillian started them with the basics. Alphabet, simple words, sounding out syllables. She was patient and encouraging, never making them feel stupid for what they did not know. Isaac proved to be a quick study, his brow furrowed in concentration as he worked through the reading primers she had borrowed from the school. "You are good at this," she told him during a break, watching him sound out words from a newspaper. "I am motivated," he said. "Caroline used to read to me from books, poetry and stories about faraway places. I always felt like I was missing half of it because I could not read the words myself. I want to know what she loved about it." The vulnerability in his admission touched Lillian deeply. She had misjudged him at first, thinking him simple because he was a cowboy. But Isaac Ramsey had depths that surprised her, a mind that hungered for knowledge and a heart that remembered love even through grief. On the 4th Sunday of October, Isaac came to the boarding house with an excited energy Lillian had not seen before. "The cabin is ready enough that you can see it properly," he said. "The walls are up, the roof is on, and we started on the fireplace. Would you like to come see?" Lillian did not even pause to put on a bonnet. She wrapped the blue shawl around her shoulders and followed Isaac to the horses. They rode to the clearing in comfortable silence, but when they arrived, Lillian gasped. What had been an empty meadow was now home to a beautiful log cabin that looked like it had grown there naturally. The walls were made of thick pine logs, carefully notched and fitted together, and the roof was covered in split shingles. 2 glass windows flanked a solid door, and a stone chimney rose from the center of the structure. The porch Isaac had promised ran across the front, with railings of peeled poles and steps leading down to the meadow. "Isaac, it is wonderful," Lillian breathed. He grinned, pleased by her reaction. "Come see inside." The interior was one large room, but Isaac had divided it cleverly with partial walls that created a sleeping area, a living space, and a kitchen corner. The fireplace dominated one wall, built from river stones fitted together with skill that spoke of long practice. The windows let in streams of golden afternoon light, and the floor was made of smooth planks that still smelled of fresh-cut wood. "There is still work to do," Isaac said, pointing out the unfinished areas. Chinking between the logs, a proper door for the bedroom area, shelves and cabinets. "But the structure is sound. You could move in now if you had to." Lillian walked slowly around the space, running her hand along the smooth logs. You built this in 3 weeks. 4 men working hard can accomplish a lot when they are motivated. Isaac moved to stand beside her at the window that looked out over the valley. I know it is not what you are used to. Philadelphia probably has houses 10 times this size with running water and gas lights. Philadelphia has houses that feel like prisons, Lillian said. This feels like freedom. Isaac turned to look at her, and the air between them suddenly felt charged with something Lillian did not have words for. They were standing close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his green eyes and smell the pine sap on his clothes. Her heart was beating too fast, and she could not seem to look away from his face. Lillian, Isaac said, her name soft in his rough voice, I need to tell you something. What? I did not build this cabin just because you needed a place to stay. I built it because from the moment you stepped off that stagecoach, I have not been able to stop thinking about you. And I know that is probably not proper to say, and you probably think I am just some rough cowboy who does not know better, but I have never been good at hiding what I feel. Lillian's breath caught. I do not think you are just some rough cowboy. What do you think I am? She reached up and touched his face, her fingers trembling slightly. I think you are the kindest, most honorable man I have ever met. I think you saw someone in trouble and helped without asking for anything in return. I think you carry your grief like a badge of honor because it means you loved people deeply enough that losing them broke you, and I think I have been falling in love with you since the day you offered to build me a cabin before winter came. Isaac made a sound that was half laugh, half groan, and pulled her into his arms. Lillian went willingly, wrapping her arms around his waist and pressing her face into his chest. He smelled like wood smoke and leather and the clean scent of pine, and his heart was pounding as hard as hers beneath her cheek. I am in love with you, Isaac said into her hair, completely and terrifyingly in love. I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a month, but out here, a month can teach you more about a person than a year in some soft city. Lillian pulled back enough to look up at him. Are you saying city people do not know how to love properly? I am saying you do, Isaac said, and kissed her. It was nothing like the chaste kisses Lillian had received from suitors in Philadelphia. Awkward pecks that felt like duty. This was heat and hunger, and coming home all at once, Isaac's hands cradling her face like she was something precious, her own fingers tangling in his hair. They kissed until they were both breathless, until the sunlight slanting through the windows had shifted lower, until Lillian felt like her entire world had rearranged itself around this moment. We should probably talk about what happens next, Isaac said eventually, his forehead resting against hers. What do you want to happen next? Lillian asked. I want to marry you. I want you to live in this cabin and teach the children and come home to me every night. I want to build you furniture and bring you flowers from the meadow and read books with you by the fire. I want to give you everything I have and everything I am and spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you. Lillian laughed, joy bubbling up from somewhere deep inside. That is quite a list. Too much? Not enough, she said. I want all of that and more. I want to wake up next to you and learn everything about you and fight with you about silly things and make up again. I want to watch the seasons change in this valley and grow old knowing I chose this life, chose you, chose us. Is that a yes? Isaac asked, grinning. That is a very definite yes. They kissed again, sealing the promise, and Lillian thought about all the paths that had led her here. Her father's death, the stagecoach west, the failed lodging arrangement. Each piece of bad luck had been a step toward this moment, this man, this love that felt as big as the sky over Idaho. When? Isaac asked. When can we get married? Whenever you want. Tomorrow, if there is a preacher available. There is a circuit preacher coming through next Sunday. He could do it then if we ask. Then we will ask, Lillian said firmly. They stayed at the cabin until the sun was setting, making plans and dreaming aloud about their future. Isaac promised to finish the interior work before the wedding, and Lillian said she would start bringing her things from the boarding house. It was all happening so fast, but it felt right in a way nothing had ever felt right before. When they rode back to town in the gathering dusk, Lillian leaned back against Isaac's chest, the two of them sharing his horse because neither wanted to be apart. The stars were coming out overhead, brilliant and uncountable in the clear mountain air, and Lillian thought she had never seen anything so beautiful. I used to wish on stars when I was a girl, she said, My father told me it was foolish, that stars were just balls of burning gas and could not grant wishes. What did you wish for? Isaac asked. To matter, to have a life that meant something. She tilted her head back to look at him. I think maybe the stars were listening after all. The town of Snake River reacted to the news of their engagement with a mix of surprise and delight. Martha Henderson announced that she had seen it coming from the first day, and several of the students' mothers volunteered to help Lillian prepare for the wedding. The 3 weeks between the engagement and the ceremony passed in a whirlwind of activity, with Isaac finishing the cabin's interior and Lillian trying to figure out what a wedding in the wilderness should look like. Nothing fancy, she told Martha, who had taken it upon herself to organize the event. Just something simple and honest. You will have flowers, Martha said firmly, and a proper dress, even if I have to sew it myself, and a cake. You cannot get married without a cake. In the end, Lillian borrowed a white dress from a young woman in town who had been married the previous spring, and Martha did indeed sew a veil from lace curtains she claimed she had been meaning to replace anyway. The morning of the wedding dawned cold and bright, the first serious snow of the season falling in fat, lazy flakes that turned the world into something from a fairy tale. Lillian stood in front of the small mirror in the boarding house storage room, adjusting the veil and trying to calm her racing heart. She was about to marry a man she had known for 6 weeks, a cowboy who had built her a cabin and taught her that love could be simple and uncomplicated and true. It should have terrified her, but instead she felt only a deep certainty that this was exactly where she was supposed to be. A knock on the door announced Martha. "It is time, dear. Everyone is waiting at the school." They had decided to hold the ceremony in the schoolhouse, since it was the only building in town big enough to hold everyone who wanted to attend. Lillian walked through the snowy streets with Martha at her side, and when she entered the schoolhouse, she found it transformed. Someone had brought pine boughs to decorate the walls, and candles flickered on every surface, filling the room with warm light. The students sat in the front rows with their parents, and the ranch hands stood in the back in their Sunday best, hair slicked down and looking uncomfortable in clean shirts. And at the front of the room, beside the circuit preacher in his severe black coat, stood Isaac Ramsey. He wore a new shirt and a vest Lillian had never seen before, and his hair was neatly trimmed, and when he saw her walking down the aisle between the desks, his face lit up with such pure joy that Lillian felt tears prick her eyes. She took his hand when she reached him, and the preacher began the ceremony. Lillian barely heard the words, too focused on Isaac's face, on the calluses of his palm against hers, on the magnitude of the promise they were making. When the preacher asked if she took this man to be her husband, she said, "I do," in a voice that rang clear and certain through the little schoolhouse. Isaac's voice was rough with emotion when he said the same words, and when the preacher pronounced them married, Isaac kissed her like they were the only two people in the world. The schoolhouse erupted in cheers and applause, and Lillian laughed against Isaac's mouth, giddy with happiness. The town had organized a reception of sorts in the space behind the general store, with tables set up and food contributed by every family in Snake River. There was roasted venison and fresh bread, apple cider, and 3 different kinds of pie, and Martha's promised cake, a lopsided but delicious creation covered in honey frosting. People toasted the newlyweds and told stories and danced to music provided by an old man with a fiddle who claimed to have played at 100 weddings in his time. As the afternoon wore on and the snow continued to fall, Isaac leaned down to whisper in Lillian's ear. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Ramsey?" The name sent a thrill through her. Mrs. Ramsey, wife, partner, home. "More than ready," she said. They slipped away while the party was still going strong, riding through the snowy twilight toward the cabin by the river. Someone had been there before them because smoke rose from the chimney and lamplight glowed in the windows. When they went inside, they found the fire burning warm and welcoming, and flowers in a jar on the table, and their few belongings arranged to make the space feel lived in and loved. Martha, Lillian guessed. Probably Pete, too, Isaac said. He is sentimental under all that gruff. They stood in the middle of their home, still wearing their wedding clothes, and looked at each other. Lillian felt suddenly shy, aware that they were married now, that this was their wedding night, that everything was about to change. Isaac seemed to sense her nervousness. He took her hands gently. "We do not have to do anything you are not ready for. I have waited this long for you. I can wait longer." Lillian shook her head. "I am not scared. I am just taking it in. This morning I woke up alone in a storage room. Tonight I am home with my husband. It is a lot. Good a lot or bad a lot? The best lot, she said, and reached up to kiss him. They undressed each other slowly by firelight, Isaac's hands shaking slightly as he worked the buttons of Lillian's borrowed dress, Lillian's fingers fumbling with his vest and shirt. They learned each other's bodies with tenderness and care, Isaac whispering how beautiful she was, Lillian running her hands over the scars and muscles that mapped his life. When they finally came together, it was with a gentleness that made Lillian weep, and Isaac kissed away her tears and held her like she was the answer to every prayer he had forgotten he knew. Afterward, they lay tangled together under quilts, watching the firelight play across the log walls and listening to the wind whisper around the cabin's corners. "Tell me something I do not know about you," Lillian said, her head on Isaac's chest. Isaac was quiet for a moment, his hand stroking her hair. "When my family died, I wanted to die too. I spent the first year out here taking stupid risks, working too hard, not caring if I got hurt. I think part of me was waiting for something to finish the job the fever started. But then one day, I was up on the mountain, and I saw this valley laid out below, and I thought about Caroline and how she always said, 'Life was a gift you did not waste.' That was when I decided to actually live instead of just existing." Lillian propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "What changed, that day on the mountain?" "I realized that surviving was not the same as honoring them. They would have wanted me to build something, to find joy again. So I bought the land and started the ranch and tried to figure out who Isaac Ramsey was supposed to be without them." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "And then, you showed up, and everything I had been building suddenly had a point." "I am glad you did not give up," Lillian whispered. "I am so glad you kept going until you found me." "Until you found me," Isaac corrected. "You are the one who got on that stagecoach and came west into the unknown. That took courage. Or desperation. Sometimes they are the same thing." They talked late into the night, sharing stories and secrets and dreams. Lillian told him about her mother, who had died when she was young, and her father's distant kindness that never quite became love. She told him about always feeling like she was too much, too loud, too opinionated for the narrow life Philadelphia offered. Isaac told her about growing up on a farm, about learning to ride before he could walk, about the closeness of a family that knew hard work and simple pleasures. He told her about Caroline's laugh and his mother's cooking, and the way his father used to sing while doing chores. "You carry them with you," Lillian said, "in everything you do." "I try to," Isaac said. "It is the only way I know to keep them alive." The first weeks of their marriage settled into a pattern that felt both new and timeless. Lillian taught school during the day, and Isaac worked the ranch, but every evening they came together at the cabin to share a meal and read by the fire and fall into bed with the eager passion of newlyweds. Isaac proved to be a devoted student, his reading improving rapidly until he could work through entire books on his own. They read aloud to each other on cold nights, taking turns with the voices, acting out the exciting parts. "You are good at this," Lillian said one evening, as Isaac performed a dramatic reading of a fight scene from a dime novel one of the ranch hands had loaned him. "I have a good teacher," Isaac said, pulling her into his lap. "The best teacher." November gave way to December, and the snow piled deep around the cabin. Isaac had built well, and the little house stayed warm and tight even when the wind howled down from the mountains. They woke to frost patterns on the windows and went to sleep, wrapped around each other against the cold. Lillian had never been so consistently happy, the kind of deep contentment that came from building a life with purpose and love. The week before Christmas, a blizzard rolled in that lasted 3 days and buried Snake River under 4 feet of snow. School was canceled, and even the ranch work slowed to essential tasks only. Lillian and Isaac found themselves snowed in together, and rather than feeling trapped, Lillian reveled in the forced intimacy. They cooked elaborate meals, played card games Isaac taught her, made love in the middle of the afternoon, just because they could. "I could stay like this forever," Lillian said, curled against Isaac on the 4th day as the storm finally cleared. "Just you and me in a cabin full of snow? Just you and me, period. I know we have to go back to regular life, but part of me wants to keep the world at bay a little longer." Isaac kissed the top of her head. "The world will still be there when we are ready for it, and we will face it together." Christmas came, their first as a married couple. They could not make it to town for services because the roads were impassable, so they celebrated alone in the cabin. Lillian had secretly made Isaac a shirt from fabric she had traded for in town, blue as a summer sky, and Isaac gave her a bookshelf he had built and hidden in the barn, already stocked with books he had ordered from a catalog. "Isaac, this must have cost a fortune," Lillian said, running her hands over the smooth wood and the leather spines. "You are worth a fortune," Isaac said simply. "I want you to have everything that makes you happy." They spent the day reading and cooking and making plans for the future. Isaac talked about expanding the ranch, maybe bringing in sheep in addition to cattle. Lillian mentioned starting an evening school for adults who wanted to improve their reading. They discussed building a barn near the cabin, getting chickens, planting a garden come spring. "I want children eventually," Lillian said, watching Isaac's face carefully. "Is that something you want too?" Isaac smiled. "I want everything with you, sons, daughters, whatever comes. This cabin full of noise and life and your laugh. My laugh is not that loud." "It is wonderful," Isaac said, "like music." As winter deepened into January, Lillian noticed changes in her body. She was tired in a way that had nothing to do with teaching, and her stomach felt unsettled in the mornings. When she realized she had missed her monthly courses, she felt a flutter of excitement and fear in equal measure. She waited to tell Isaac until she was certain, until Martha had confirmed her suspicions, with a knowing smile and practical advice. That evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Lillian took Isaac's hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "I have news," she said. Isaac's eyes widened. "Lillian, are you saying what I think you are saying? If you think I am saying we are going to have a baby, then yes, that is exactly what I am saying." Isaac let out a whoop of joy and spun her around, then immediately set her down again, worried he might have hurt her. "Are you all right? Should you be standing? Do you need to sit down?" Lillian laughed. "I am pregnant, not made of glass. But yes, I would like to sit down, and I would very much like you to hold me while we talk about this." They sat together on the couch Isaac had made, Lillian tucked into his side, and talked about everything. Names and timing, and how they would manage with a baby. Isaac promised to build a cradle and expand the cabin to add a nursery. Lillian worried about teaching while pregnant and caring for an infant, but Martha had already offered to help, as had several of the mothers in town. "You do not have to do it all alone," Isaac reminded her. "That is what family is for, and this town is our family now. Our baby will grow up surrounded by people who care," Lillian said wonderingly. "That is more than I ever had." "That is more than either of us had," Isaac agreed. "We get to build something new, something better." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the late winter and into spring. Lillian continued teaching until her belly made it difficult to move between the desks, and then she reluctantly handed the school over to a substitute Martha found from a neighboring town. Isaac fretted over her constantly, bringing her treats and rubbing her swollen feet and reading to her when she was too tired to hold a book. "You are going to be a wonderful father," Lillian told him one evening as he talked to her belly, telling their unborn child stories about the ranch and the mountains. "I hope so," Isaac said. "I am terrified I will do something wrong." "We both will, probably, but we will figure it out together." In late May, as the meadow around the cabin exploded with wildflowers, Lillian went into labor. Martha came to help, along with the doctor from town, and Isaac paced the cabin like a caged animal, desperate to do something useful. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day, and there were moments when Isaac feared he would lose both Lillian and the baby. But at dawn, on May 24th, 1883, their son was born, screaming lustily and perfect in every way. The doctor placed the baby in Isaac's arms, and Isaac felt something shift fundamentally in his chest, a fierce protectiveness and love that made everything he had felt before seem like practice. "A son," he breathed, looking down at the tiny red face. "Lillian, we have a son." Lillian, exhausted and radiant, held out her arms, and Isaac carefully placed their baby against her chest. She looked up at Isaac with tears streaming down her face. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months, but never settled on anything that felt exactly right. Now, looking at their son in the dawn light, Isaac knew. "James," he said, "after your father, and William after mine, James William Ramsey." "It is perfect," Lillian whispered. "Hello, James. Welcome to the world." The first months of parenthood were exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. James was a hungry baby who woke frequently to nurse. and Lillian was tired in a way she had never imagined possible. But Isaac shared every burden he could, walking the floor with the baby when Lillian needed to sleep, learning to change diapers and swaddle and soothe. They figured it out together, one sleepless night at a time, their love deepening with each shared challenge. By the time James was 6 months old, Lillian was ready to return to teaching, at least part-time. Martha volunteered to watch the baby during school hours, delighted to have an infant to dote on. The arrangement worked beautifully, and Lillian found she could balance motherhood and teaching with Isaac's steady support. "You are amazing," Isaac told her one evening as she nursed James before bed, while simultaneously reviewing lesson plans. "I do not know how you do it all." "I have help," Lillian said. "I have you." The years that followed were full and good. James grew into a bright, curious toddler who loved following Isaac around the ranch and listening to Lillian read stories. When he was 3, Lillian discovered she was pregnant again, and this time she felt more confident, less afraid. Their daughter was born in March of 1886, a delicate girl with Lillian's dark hair and Isaac's green eyes. They named her Caroline Martha, honoring the sister Isaac had lost and the woman who had become like a mother to them both. Isaac wept when he held his daughter for the first time, overwhelmed by the gift of a second chance, a new Caroline to love. "She would have been so happy to know we named our daughter after her," he said. "I think she knows," Lillian said softly. "I think she is watching over us." With 2 children, the cabin felt smaller, and Isaac began planning an addition. He worked through the summer of 1886, expanding the cabin to include 2 proper bedrooms upstairs and enlarging the living area downstairs. The ranch was prospering, the cattle herd growing, and Isaac had hired several permanent hands to help with the work. They were no longer scraping by, but building something solid and lasting. Lillian returned to full-time teaching once Caroline was weaned, and Martha continued to help with childcare, now watching 2 children instead of 1. The town had grown as well, new families moving in, the school enrollment nearly doubling. There was talk of building a new schoolhouse, and Lillian found herself on the planning committee, her opinion valued and respected. "Do you ever miss Philadelphia?" Isaac asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching James chase fireflies in the meadow, while Caroline dozed in Lillian's arms. "Not even a little bit," Lillian said. "That was not my life. This is my life. You, the children, this place. I would not trade any of it for all the civilization in the world. Even when the outhouse freezes in January?" "Even then," Lillian laughed, "though I would not mind an indoor bathroom eventually." "I will put it on the list," Isaac said, grinning, "right after the new barn and the expanded garden and the chicken coop Caroline keeps begging for. She is 3. She does not know what she wants. She knows she wants chickens. She told me very firmly this morning." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light fade and the stars come out. 7 years had passed since Lillian had stepped off the stagecoach in Snake River, terrified and uncertain. 7 years since Isaac had offered to build her a cabin, not knowing he was building the foundation of a family. It felt like a lifetime, and no time at all. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Lillian asked. "If the widow had not moved to Boise, if you had not been in town that day, if you had not offered to help." "All the time," Isaac admitted. "And then I stop because it makes my head hurt to imagine a world where I did not find you." "You did not find me. We found each other." "Best finding I ever did," Isaac said, and leaned over to kiss her. The children grew, as children do, and the years passed with increasing speed. James started school and proved to be as bright as his mother, devouring books and asking endless questions. Caroline was more interested in the outdoors, following Isaac around the ranch and learning to ride before she was 5. In 1889, Lillian gave birth to their 3rd child, another son they named Thomas Peter, honoring the old cowhand Pete, who had become like a grandfather to their growing family. The cabin became a gathering place for the community, with Lillian hosting reading circles for women, and Isaac teaching young men the skills of ranching and carpentry. They had become pillars of Snake River, the kind of couple others looked to for advice and support. It was not a role either had expected, but it fit them like a second skin. In 1891, Idaho achieved statehood, and the whole territory celebrated. Snake River threw a festival, and Isaac was asked to give a speech about his experiences as one of the early settlers. He stood on a makeshift stage in front of what seemed like the entire town and talked about coming west with a broken heart, about finding healing in hard work and purpose in community, about the woman who had stepped off a stagecoach and changed his life. "I built Lillian a cabin before winter came," Isaac said, his voice carrying across the crowd. "But what I did not know then was that she was building me a home, not a place, but a life, a reason to keep going. She gave me a future when I thought I had lost mine, and every day since has been a gift I try to be worthy of." Lillian stood in the crowd with their 3 children, tears streaming down her face, and thought about the girl she had been at, 23, scared and determined and desperately hoping she had made the right choice. That girl could never have imagined this life, this love, this profound sense of belonging, but she had been brave enough to take the first step, to trust a stranger with kind eyes who offered help without strings attached. That night, after the children were asleep and the cabin was quiet, Lillian and Isaac lay in bed together, holding hands in the darkness. "Thank you," Lillian whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me, for building me a home, for loving me so completely that I learned how to love myself." Isaac turned to face her, his hand cupping her cheek. "Thank you for taking a chance on a broken cowboy who barely knew how to talk to people anymore. Thank you for teaching me that it is possible to love again after loss. Thank you for every day of the last 9 years." They made love slowly, tenderly, with the ease of long familiarity and the passion that had never dimmed. Afterward, Lillian lay with her head on Isaac's chest, listening to his heartbeat slow, and thought about the word home. It was not a place or a building, or even a town. It was this: the warmth of skin against skin, the sound of children breathing in the next room, the knowledge that someone would be there when you woke up and when you went to sleep, and in all the mundane moments between. The years continued to unfold, bringing both joy and challenges. There were harsh winters that tested their resilience and dry summers that threatened the ranch. Pete died in 1893, and they mourned him together, burying him on the hill above the cabin where he could look out over the valley he had loved. James left for university in Boise in 1899, the first in either family to pursue higher education. And Lillian cried for a week after he left, even though she was fiercely proud. Caroline grew into a young woman who could ride and rope as well as any man, to Isaac's delight and occasional worry. She announced at 16 that she had no interest in marriage, that she wanted to run her own ranch someday. Isaac supported her completely, teaching her everything he knew about cattle and land management. Lillian made sure Caroline also had a solid education, insisting that she could be both a rancher and a learned woman. Thomas, their youngest, was the gentlest of their children, more interested in books and drawing than ranching. He spent hours sketching the landscape and the animals, his talent undeniable. Isaac worried at first that he had failed somehow by not passing on his passion for the ranch to at least one son. But Lillian reminded him that their job was to help their children become themselves, not copies of their parents. "Thomas will find his path," she said, "just like James found his, just like Caroline is finding hers." By 1900, Isaac and Lillian had been married 18 years. They were both in their 40s now, their bodies showing the wear of hard work and the bearing of children. Isaac's hair had threads of silver at the temples, and Lillian's hands were rough from years of ranch work in addition to teaching. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young people who had fallen in love over the building of a cabin. On their 18th anniversary, Isaac took Lillian back to the meadow where he had first shown her the land. The cabin had grown and changed over the years, but the essential structure was the same, the logs he had cut and fitted still solid and true. "Do you remember what you said the first time you saw this place?" Isaac asked. "I said it felt like it had been waiting for someone to find it." "It was waiting for you," Isaac said. "I think I was waiting for you too, even though I did not know it." Lillian leaned against him, his arm around her waist. "We found each other at exactly the right time. Not too early, not too late, just when we both needed it most." They stood there as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, and reflected on the life they had built together. 3 children raised with love and purpose, a ranch that prospered, a community they had helped shape, countless students taught, books read, moments shared. "If I could go back and talk to that girl on the stagecoach," Lillian said, "I would tell her not to be afraid. I would tell her that the man with the kind eyes would become her whole world, and that every hard choice that brought her to Snake River was worth it. And if I could talk to the man standing in the shadow of that schoolhouse," Isaac said, "I would tell him to hold on, that hope was about to walk into his life in a dove-gray dress and change everything. They returned to the cabin as the stars emerged, finding their children waiting, with a dinner they had prepared together. James was home visiting from university. Caroline had ridden in from the neighboring property where she was working as a ranch manager, and Thomas had spent the day cooking with Martha, who had joined them for the celebration. "To Mama and Papa," James said, raising his glass, "for showing us what love looks like and building us a home full of it." "To the best parents in Idaho," Caroline added. "To family," Thomas said simply. They ate and laughed and told stories late into the night, the cabin full of the noise and warmth that Isaac had once dreamed of. When the children finally went to bed, Martha kissed both Isaac and Lillian on the cheek and thanked them for letting her be part of their family all these years. "You did not let me," Martha said. "I insisted. You two were the best thing that ever happened to this town, and I was not going to miss watching your story unfold." After everyone had gone to sleep, Isaac and Lillian stood on the porch in the cool night air, wrapped in the same blue shawl Isaac had given Lillian on her first day in Snake River. It was threadbare now, patches and repairs, visible even in the lamplight, but Lillian had never been willing to replace it. "I should make you a new shawl," Isaac said, fingering the worn wool. "You will not," Lillian said firmly. "This one has been with us through everything. It stays." Isaac smiled and pulled her closer. "You are a sentimental woman, Mrs. Ramsey." "Only about the things that matter, Mr. Ramsey." They stood together in the silence, listening to the river run and the wind whisper through the pines, and felt the deep contentment of a life well lived. They had started with nothing but hope and hard work, and they had built something that would last beyond them, a legacy of love and determination and the willingness to take chances on each other. The following years brought more changes and more joys. James became a lawyer and returned to Idaho to practice, settling in Boise but visiting often. Caroline did indeed start her own ranch, a small spread she ran with efficiency and skill, becoming known throughout the region as one of the best cattle women around. Thomas went to art school in San Francisco and became a respected illustrator, his drawings appearing in magazines and books across the country. Isaac and Lillian became grandparents multiple times over, their cabin often full of visiting children and grandchildren. They slowed down as age crept up on them, Isaac finally hiring a manager for the ranch, and Lillian retiring from teaching, though she continued to tutor students who needed extra help. In 1910, as they approached their 30th anniversary, Isaac planned a surprise for Lillian. He commissioned Thomas to create a painting of the cabin as it had looked that first day, newly built and waiting for its occupant. The painting was beautiful, capturing the golden light and the sense of possibility that had hung over the meadow that October afternoon. When he gave it to Lillian, she wept. "It is perfect. It is exactly how I remember it." "I wanted you to have a record of where we started," Isaac said, "so we never forget what we built together." "I could never forget," Lillian said. "That cabin saved my life. You saved my life." "You saved mine first," Isaac countered. "You gave me a reason to build instead of just survive. You made me want to live again." They hung the painting in the main room, where they could see it every day, a reminder of the foundation on which everything else had been built. When people asked about it, Lillian told the story of arriving in Snake River with nowhere to stay, and a cowboy who offered to build her a cabin before winter came. She told it like the love story it was, with all the fear and hope and eventual joy. The years passed more quickly as they grew older, seasons blending together in the way they do when you have lived in a place long enough to see the patterns repeat. Isaac developed arthritis in his hands from all the years of hard work, and Lillian's eyes grew weak, requiring spectacles for reading. But they were together, still holding hands as they walked through the meadow, still sitting by the fire on cold evenings, still finding new things to talk about after decades of conversation. In 1920, as the world recovered from a great war and entered a new decade, Isaac and Lillian celebrated 40 years of marriage. Their children threw them a party at the ranch, inviting everyone they had touched over the years. Former students, now grown with children of their own. Ranch hands Isaac had employed and taught. Women Lillian had helped learn to read. The gathering was huge, spilling out of the expanded cabin and onto the grounds, with tables of food and music and dancing. "I cannot believe this many people came," Lillian said, overwhelmed by the turnout. "You touched a lot of lives," Isaac said. "We both did. This is what 40 years of being good neighbors looks like." Person after person came up to thank them for some kindness or lesson or opportunity they had provided. A woman who had learned to read in Lillian's adult classes and gone on to open a bookstore. A man who had started as a Green Ranch hand under Isaac's tutelage and now owned his own successful spread. Children and grandchildren of students and workers, all part of the web of connection and community they had helped weave. As the party wound down and the sun set over the familiar mountains, Isaac and Lillian found themselves back in their favorite spot on the porch, watching the last guests depart. 40 years, Lillian said wonderingly. Where did the time go? Into building this, Isaac said, gesturing at everything around them. Into raising our children and helping our neighbors and making a life that mattered. Do you have any regrets? Lillian asked, though she thought she knew the answer. Isaac was quiet for a moment, considering. I regret that my first family did not get to meet you, that they did not get to see what came after the grief, but I do not regret anything about our life together. Not a single day, even the hard ones. Especially the hard ones, because those taught us we could survive anything as long as we had each other. Lillian took his weathered hand in hers. I regret that I spent so many years before meeting you trying to be someone I was not. But then I think about how maybe I had to go through all of that to be ready for you, for this life. So maybe those are not regrets after all, just necessary steps on the path. They sat together as the stars emerged, the same stars that had shone on their wedding night and their children's births and every important moment in between. They had grown old together, their bodies failing in small ways, but their love had only deepened and strengthened. They knew each other's thoughts before they were spoken, could communicate with a glance across a crowded room, had built a shorthand of shared experience that needed no words. I am going to love you until my last breath, Isaac said, and probably beyond that, if such things are possible. They are possible, Lillian said with certainty. Love like ours does not just end because the body stops working. It continues in our children and their children. It lives in every life we touched and every lesson we taught. We built something bigger than ourselves, Isaac. We built something that will last. As they grew into their 70s, both Isaac and Lillian's health began to decline. Isaac's heart grew weak, and Lillian's lungs struggled with the mountain air. Their children urged them to move into town, to somewhere more manageable, but they refused. The cabin by the river was their home, the place where their love had taken root and flourished, and they would not leave it while they still had breath. They spent their final years quietly, surrounded by children and grandchildren who visited often. They read together still, though sometimes one would fall asleep mid-sentence, and the other would simply hold the book and wait. They sat on the porch in good weather, wrapped in blankets, watching the valley they had called home for so many decades. They talked about the past, but also about the future, about the grandchildren pursuing their dreams and the great-grandchildren just being born. Isaac passed first, in his sleep, on a cold January night in 1925. He was 73 years old and had lived to see his children prosperous and happy, his ranch thriving, and the woman he loved content. Lillian woke to find him still beside her, his face peaceful, his hand still holding hers. She did not weep immediately, too stunned by the sudden absence of the heartbeat that had been beside her own for 43 years. The funeral was the largest Snake River had ever seen, people coming from across Idaho and beyond to pay their respects to the man who had helped build the community. They buried him on the hill next to Pete, where he could look out over the ranch and the cabin and the river forever. Lillian stood at the graveside, supported by her children, and finally let herself cry. He built me a cabin before winter came, she told the gathered crowd. And then he built me a life. He taught me that love does not have to be complicated, that the best things are often the simplest. He showed me every day what it means to be a partner, to choose someone again and again, no matter what comes. I am the luckiest woman who ever lived because I got to love Isaac Ramsey and be loved by him in return. She lived for another 3 years, staying in the cabin despite her children's concerns. She insisted she was fine, that Isaac was still with her in every log and stone, in every corner of the home they had built together. She spent her days reading and writing letters to grandchildren and sitting on the porch watching the seasons change. She was ready when her time came, eager even, to rejoin the man who had been her whole heart. Lillian Morrison Ramsey passed away in her sleep in the spring of 1928, in the bed she had shared with Isaac for 43 years, in the cabin he had built for her before winter came. She was 70 years old, and she left behind 3 children, 11 grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren, all of whom carried forward the lessons of love and determination she and Isaac had taught. They buried her next to Isaac on the hill, and on the shared headstone their children commissioned, they inscribed the words that best summed up the love story that had defined both their lives. He built her a cabin before winter came. She built him a home that lasted forever. The cabin still stands today, preserved by the family as a reminder of where it all started. The logs Isaac cut and fitted are still solid, the stone fireplace still draws properly, and the porch where they sat for so many evenings still offers the same view of the valley and the mountains beyond. Visitors come sometimes, descendants and history buffs, and people who have heard the story of the schoolteacher who arrived with nowhere to stay and the cowboy who gave her a home. The story of Isaac and Lillian Ramsey became part of the folklore of Snake River, a reminder that love can grow in the most unlikely circumstances, that kindness to strangers can change lives, and that the best things we build are not structures but relationships, not things but legacies of connection and care that ripple forward through generations. They started with nothing but hope and determination, a schoolteacher with nowhere to stay and a cowboy willing to help. They built a cabin before winter came, and in the process, they built a love that outlasted them both, a family that continues to this day, and a story that reminds anyone who hears it that the greatest adventures often begin with a simple act of kindness and the courage to say yes to the unknown.